รายการต่อไปนี้เป็นรายการทั่วไปสามารถรับชมได้ทุกวัย
สนับสนุนโดยแลกเงินด้วยบัตรเครดิตกสิกรไทยเที่ยวก่อนจ่ายทีหลังไม่มีค่าธรรมเนียมผ่อนชำระได้จากธนาคารกสิกรไทย
สวัสดีค่ะมองเรามองโลกวันนี้เป็นบทสัมภาษณ์พิเศษคุณเควนตินคูเปอร์นักจัดรายการวิทยุชื่อดังจากสหราชอาณาจักรเควนตินคูเปอร์ได้ชื่อว่าเป็นผู้ที่สามารถสื่อสารเรื่องราวด้านวิทยาศาสตร์ซึ่งหลายคนมองว่าเป็นเรื่องราวที่ยากและซับซ้อนให้เป็นเรื่องง่ายที่เข้าใจได้เราไปเปิดโลกวิทยาศาสตร์กับเควนตินคูเปอร์กันไปดูว่าทำไมเขาถึงหลงไหลวิทยาศาสตร์ซึ่งเขาบอกว่าสนุกมากๆและไปดูกันว่าตอนนี้ในแวดวงวิทยาศาสตร์มีเรื่องอะไรบ้างที่น่าตื่นเต้นค่ะเควินตินคูเปอร์ชาวอังกฤษวัย56 ปีจบการศึกษาจากมหาวิทยาลัยเอดินบะระสาขาจิตวิทยาและปัญญาประดิษฐ์เควินตินเป็นนักข่าวสายวิทยาศาสตร์เขาจัดรายการด้านวิทยาศาสตร์มาแล้วหลายรายการเช่นรายการ Material World ทางสถานีวิทยุ BBC ช่อง 4ซึ่งได้รับการชื่นชมอย่างมากว่าสามารถอธิบายเรื่องวิทยาศาสตร์ให้เข้าใจได้ง่ายนอกจากนั้นเควินตินยังเป็นผู้ดำเนินรายการในกิจกรรมด้านวิทยาศาสตร์หลายงานซึ่งรวมถึงการแข่งขันเฟมแลบการแข่งขันการสื่อสารวิทยาศาสตร์ชั้นนำระดับโลกด้วยความทุ่มเทให้กับวงการวิทยาศาสตร์ในปี 2013 เควินตินได้รับปริญญาเอกกิตติมศักดิ์จากมหาวิทยาลัยเอดินบะระในฐานะที่เป็นผู้มีส่วนร่วมอย่างมากในการสร้างความเข้าใจด้านวิทยาศาสตร์และด้านวิศวกรรมสู่สาธารณชนQuentin, what drew you to science in the first place?
I don't think, rather oddly, I was drawn to science. I was drawn to everything. I was just one of those kids. I was interested in science and the arts and sports and the garden and the sky and everything else. And then as you get older, you discover that you meet a lot of people and they suddenly tell you they're not interested in science. And you think, well, why aren't you interested in science? It's what makes our world. It's what tells us about our place in the universe. So I find it strange that when people aren't interested in science, and then you say to them, okay, you say you're not interested in science. What are you interested in? Oh, I'm interested in Formula One. Ah, well, Formula One, there's a lot of science in Formula One. Oh, okay, I'm interested in fashion. Well, there's a lot of science in how we make the clothes and what the materials are. Oh, I'm interested in sport. Well, there's an enormous amount of science in sport. So actually, not only am I interested in science, I think you and everybody else are interested in science, whether they think they are or not.
Without us knowing that we are actually interested in science.
Exactly. I think that word science, you can put all these amazing things in a box. And if you label the box science, a lot of people go, ooh, I don't want to go opening that box because they've been scared off science, usually at school, by having to memorize huge, enormous things or having to do complex mathematical formulae. But actually, what's inside the box, they're really interested in. They just don't think they like science.
So what is science, actually?
Science is knowledge. Science is everything. Science comes from the Greek word meaning to know and to knowledge. And really, it's about our understanding of everything. It's about, the clothes I'm wearing. It's about the chairs we're sitting on. It's about the gravity that stops us floating off into space. It's about the technology that's allowing this interview to take place. So all of these things, you give me a subject that isn't science. Anything you can think of, there is a science element to it.
When you present science, whether it's on radio or on television, what are your biggest challenges?
The biggest challenge is the scientists themselves. It's not so much getting them to talk about the science, which they're usually happy to do, and the great pleasure of my job is I get to talk to people who know about the most fascinating things. The difficult bit is sometimes getting them to talk about how they feel. How did you feel when you made this discovery? And they'll go, oh, well, this is very important for them. No, but how did you feel? What was it like? It's scientists have been almost trained too much not to talk about their emotions. And that's a real pity because I think what people can relate to is how people feel. Similarly, if a scientist talks about some brilliant new advance in biotechnology, maybe you understand it, maybe you don't. But if they talk about what they're trying to do, what they don't yet know, well, you're the same. You don't know it either. So we can all identify with what science is trying to do, That's why I think we all got so excited about the hunt for the Higgs boson a few years ago and the Large Hadron Collider. We weren't exactly sure what the Higgs boson was, and we didn't entirely know how the Large Hadron Collider worked. But the idea that there was something so big looking for something so small and that so many people were involved, we kind of got excited in it as a mystery story.
Quentin Cooper will be at the Cheltenham Science Festival for Material World.
เควินตินได้รับการยกย่องจากนิตยสารไทม์ว่าเป็นผู้ชายที่มีความกระตือรือร้นมากที่สุดในโลกและเป็นผู้เชี่ยวชาญในทุกด้านตั้งแต่เพลงป๊อปจนถึงฟิสิกส์ดาราศาสตร์นอกจากเป็นนักข่าวด้านวิทยาศาสตร์แล้วเควินตินยังเป็นนักวิจารณ์ภาพยนตร์อีกด้วย How did that come about being a film critic as well and then radio host on science and film?
I've been around a long time, but the essential thing was I did a proper BBC news training, worked on the newsroom, worked on big news stories, and ran youth programs and entertainment programs, worked with musicians and comedians. And then somebody discovered I had a science degree, and they started asking me to present science programs. And because other people didn't want to present science programs, and I did, then gradually I ended up that way. I still to this day, although I get described as a science journalist, I think I'm a journalist. I'm interested in everything, but I discovered that a lot of journalists, they have a bit of a, don't get me on science, a lot of journalists haven't got a scientific background.
As a film critic, what do you think of La La Land?
I think La La Land is going to win a lot of Oscars. I think it's great entertainment. I actually prefer the director's previous movie, Whiplash, which I think is just brilliant and scary. But La La Land, great techniques, great lead roles, and I think it's going to do very well. Although my favourite film of the year, probably Moonlight, I think. I would like to see that do well.
What are the sciences in La La Land? Do you see any science in there?
Well, of course there is science in La La Land. There's the whole science that movies making is an incredibly scientific business because you've got to think about the techniques, how you match the sound to the pictures, what's actually going on when you're looking at life in 24 frames a second, what it is about the mind that makes us see these series of still images as a moving image. There's a lot about perception and psychology in there as well. And as I say, there's the whole technology of how you film. La La Land's not a great example of it, but a lot of films these days, of course, use a lot of digital techniques and computer-generated imagery, so there's a lot of science to do around that as well, and so on and so on. So you can always find science behind anything.
Let's talk about teaching science in schools. What are good teaching for science?
The worst problem is bad teaching. I think, unfortunately, we often talk about how do we get children excited about science? And I think that's the wrong question. Children are excited about science. You get a 4-year-old, 5-year-old, 6-year-old, I've got a 6-year-old kid, he wants to go and see explosions, he wants to see bright things, he's interested in dinosaurs, he's interested in outer space. I think most kids are like that. Then at school, we put them off science because we don't tell them just about the things they want to know. We give them the equations and the periodic tables and the complicated things. We make stuff very dull for them and very complicated. I was nearly put off science by trying to learn the laws of electricity because it was just like I could not get my head around them. It took me a long, long time to get there. So I think a good teacher is somebody who keeps that level of excitement and enthusiasm and passion up about them.
How do you nurture this curiosity of children all the way into their adulthood?
I think science is a never-ending journey into the unknown. You could be a young scientist, you could be in your early 20s, and you could be looking down a microscope at something no one's looked at before, or looking through a telescope at some astronomical feature that nobody's ever seen, or working on a new material. That idea that you can be the first. We can't conquer new lands and we can't climb new mountains because they've all been climbed and the lands have all been found. But in science, there is always new territory to go into. And so I think science can keep people excited all the time.
To be a scientist and say to be a celebrity or a singer, how would you convince the younger generation to be interested to become a scientist?
Well, of course, it's very hard to take a probabilistic approach to a teenager. You can't say your chances of being the next Rihanna are this small and your chances of being a particle physicist are whatever it is. But I think you can, but there is an element of that. And I think there's an awareness, particularly if people read the lives of scientists, and actually now we are getting to a culture that's beginning to help absorb these things. I've been involved for 12 years now with something called FameLab, which is the world's largest science communication competition. Started at the Cheltenham Science Festival, and with the help of the British Council, it's now spread to dozens of countries around the world, including Thailand. People like that help infuse people about science, and younger people can watch them and think, okay, I want to be like them. I don't want to be a white coat or a stereotypical Hollywood crazy scientist person. I want to be one of the people who changes the world. You're going to have more chance to change the world as a scientist than you are as a pop singer.
Bone will get drilling and put still in this hurt like insane.
So it's obvious who is the dominant one.
So romantic, yes?
No chips. Hand up if you're a bit distressed.
Very beautiful poutine.
Thank you, and maybe later. Bye.
Yeah, how come people tend to have that image of scientists, wearing the white gown and then wearing thick spectacles and then being in their lab doing their stuff?
You are absolutely right to mention this. This is something that fascinates me because 60 years ago this year, the sociologist Margaret Mead did a paper about the image of scientists, and she wrote down what kids tend to draw. And it's amazing, if you read it today, it's exactly the same as kids draw today.
Still.
60 years on, nothing's changed. And yet we all know that science has completely transformed every aspect of our society. So I'm fascinated that science has transformed our world, but the image of scientists has remained stuck. It's the one thing they can't change. Part of that image of the scientist is of the kind of genius level scientist. We think, oh, I can't be a scientist because I'm no Einstein. But actually, you don't have to be an Einstein. Most scientists aren't, no offense scientists, but they're not unbelievably clever. You don't have to be super clever to be a scientist. You just have to be keen and bright and work at it. We had a great thing a couple of years ago. There was a mission called the Rosetta Mission, which was trying to land a little probe, the Philae probe, on a comet. And one of the lead scientists on this was a British guy who happens to be a kind of heavy metal, death metal fan, has tattoos all over his arms, and he's a very kind of muscly guy, a guy called Matt Taylor. And a load of people saw him and they could not compute that this guy was a scientist.
Is climate change the biggest science challenge that we have today?
I would probably say yes. Humans have this amazing ability. No other animal has it as far as we know. We can see the future before it gets here. And yet, we have this other scary ability to look the other way. We've seen all the signs of how our existence is affecting the planet, and yet we try and say, oh, it's not us, or it's not important, or we can't do anything about it. And now the problems stack up and stack up and stack up, and then we have to take more and more urgent action. We have to make it think that our actions can make a difference. There's a great saying by Gandhi, everything you do is of no consequence, but it is of the greatest importance that you do it, because each individual action doesn't count for much, but collectively, if all of us decided to turn down the thermostat by 1 degree, or in Thailand to turn off the aircon for 1 extra hour a day, whatever it might be, one person doing that isn't going to make a difference. And we get a few people who are very big on climate change who've sacrificed everything. That's not going to make a big difference. What makes a big difference is a lot of us just thinking, you know what, I'll have 1 less of those, I'll have 1 less of this, I'll turn this down by 1 degree, I'll make 1 less journey, and then we get the resources.
How can any country best create a culture of innovation and creativity?
I think we start with the young people. We need to encourage them to feel engaged so that the best people go into science, and then we need to give them the opportunities to grow that. So they need to have the labs, the facilities, the abilities not just to emulate what's going on elsewhere, but to give people the chance to actually pursue areas of research that they think they will find rewarding. There's a long history in science of what we call blue skies research, where you're not doing that research because it's going to develop a cure for cancer. You're not doing that research because it's going to develop a new plastic coating. You're doing that research because it's interesting and you're not quite sure where it will lead. I was very reassured a couple of years ago because they have this prize called the Ig Nobel Prize. It's a kind of jokey award every year for science that seems to be kind of crazy and stupid. And about 12, 15 years ago, they gave it to a guy called Andre Geim, who'd done some work which involved levitating frogs. But 10 years later, he won an actual Nobel Prize because he'd helped discover graphene, this new form of carbon, which has an amazing uses, incredibly thin layers and coatings and all sorts of possibilities. And it showed that the kind of person who seems to be doing crazy stuff is actually not necessarily doing crazy stuff. It might turn out to be the future. I think it's really important if you want a culture of innovation that you don't constrain that innovation too much and say you can only invent stuff like this. You've got to let people expand and explore. That's what science is. You don't quite know what's over the horizon.
How crucial is government support or government budget and spending on science?
Absolutely crucial. Two reasons. One, if a country is going to have the benefits of science, it has to invest in science. And secondly, it has to appreciate what's going on with the scientists as well. Because if you just try and say, we want the science that's going to deal with an immediate need of that nation, the danger is you lose a lot of other science. You really can't tell where the next innovation is going to come from. The one thing we can be sure from the history of science is there is probably something around the corner that none of us have anticipated. I love science fiction, going back to the movie side of things, but you can't, if we know anything, science fiction films always get it wrong because the future is never like we think. If we'd have watched those science fiction films in the 1950s, by now we'd be living on other planets and there'd be robots among us that were indistinguishable from humans and we'd have laser guns and we'd be transporting. That's not what we got. Instead, we got mobile phones and the internet and things that they didn't anticipate. There'll be new inventions that we cannot possibly see coming. Now, if you only invest in the current technology and trying to make it a bit faster and better, you end up running down narrower and narrower channels. With government support, encourage science to be broad and wide, and then you get the breakthrough.
What are some of the science discoveries that you think will come round the corner and would be groundbreaking?
Everybody has favourites, but I pin my hopes on fusion. Now, there's an old joke about fusion energy. We have controlled fission energy, which is what we use in our nuclear power plants. Fusion energy is what powers the sun and the stars, and you can get an enormous amount of energy. But the problem is, to get a controlled fusion reaction, it requires incredibly high temperatures. Temperatures too high for any metal, any substance we know of, to work. So you have to try and use magnetic fields, a torus as it's called, to hold these things in place. Now there's been a project called the Joint European Torus going on. Now there's an ITER project in the south of France. We're making progress, but 20 years ago, when I probably first started as a science journalist, and I interviewed people and I said, how far are we from fusion energy? They said, about 20 years. Now when I interview them, they say, about 20 years. It always seems to be the fuel of the future. It's not getting any closer, but my fingers are crossed that if we can manage that, then you can have nuclear power without any nuclear waste, then you can have an enormous source of energy. It wouldn't solve all our energy problems, but it would be enormously helpful. So that's the one I'm sort of got my wish list for.
So another 20 years.
Or maybe less, or maybe more.
By that time, we'll all go live in Mars.
I don't know. Well, there's a lot of scientists, Stephen Hawking and others have said, look, this is one of the big problems at the moment, is that we have a kind of species bottleneck. We're all on this one lump of rock, and if something should happen to that lump of rock, if there is a nuclear war, or if a huge asteroid strikes us, or something catastrophic happens, that's the end of our species. They would argue that the first thing we need to do is we need to get some humans onto other planets, so that just in case something goes wrong, it's not the end of all human life as we know it. Because realistically, we have to accept, if you look at the fossil record, 99.9%, and I know a lot of people use that number 99.9 just meaning a lot, but I mean literally 99.9% of all species that have ever existed are extinct. Now, we as humans think we're exempt from those rules, but I don't think we are. There's no reason to say that in 100, 1,000, 10,000 years' time, that'll be the end of our species. Now, if we want to get around that, we need to make sure we've diversified.
So you do agree that we should explore space and maybe we gotta go live somewhere else on some other planet?
I think it's a lovely idea, but we have reached this tricky point. Here are we. It's 60 years this year since the first satellite was launched. It's nearly, but tragically, it's also getting on for nearly 50 years since a human last stood on the moon. We got to the moon and we managed to achieve that. It was an incredible achievement, a great moment for humankind. But going to Mars is still a little bit too far, because getting there and getting back, the risks of radiation, we could put a human on Mars, I think, pretty easily, but we just couldn't bring them back. And that's not a very successful mission. Now, that's our nearest planet. That's as far as we can get, and we're not quite there yet. Now, is the technology around the corner to get us to Mars and back? I'd like to think it is, but it's the sort of thing every regime in the States, they say we're going to the next plan is going to put a man on Mars by 2050, and then they cut back the funding again, and then another president comes in and maybe they do it again. Now we've got more commercial space operators, we've got new players like China and India in the space race as well. Maybe we'll see the push to Mars. But as a species, are we quite ready to go to Mars yet? Are there better uses for our money on Earth, like, say, climate change? These are the tricky arguments.
What would be your advice to all of us who might be scared or might think that science is just too complex? That's why we just shut off. When you say science, okay, that's not my area, that's not my subject.
Think of it like a swimming pool. You don't need to, if you can't swim, you don't just jump in the deep end. Splash around in the shallow end and see how you get on, then maybe try and venture out into slightly deeper water, and then maybe try and see a few interesting moves you can do, go as far as you want to. You don't need to think, if you're interested in science, you need to understand what every single subatomic particle is, or you need to understand the names of every dinosaur. Do a little bit, find out what you like. I've never found a person, however much they're anti-science, who isn't interested in some aspect of science. And that's all it is. Find out. Science is everything about everything. It explains how the world works. And if you don't want to know how the world works, what are you doing in the world?
จากการพูดคุยกับคุณเควินตินคูเปอร์เห็นได้ชัดเลยนะคะว่าจริงๆแล้ววิทยาศาสตร์ไม่จำเป็นจะต้องเป็นเรื่องยิ่งใหญ่ซับซ้อนแต่อย่างใดอาจจะเป็นเรื่องเล็กๆก็ได้เพราะวิทยาศาสตร์คือทุกเรื่องที่อยู่รอบตัวเราเพราะฉะนั้นขอเพียงแค่เรามีความอยากรู้อยากเห็นหัดตั้งคำถามและพยายามหาคำตอบเพียงเท่านี้เราก็สามารถเรียนรู้วิทยาศาสตร์ได้แล้วล่ะค่ะพบกันใหม่สัปดาห์หน้าวันนี้สวัสดีค่ะ